All right, super excited today. A big welcome back to the legend of epigenetics, Cam McDonald, and you've brought someone even more fabulous, I believe, Miss Anne Larsen from PH360. Welcome to Roll with the Punches, guys.
Thank you for having us, Tiffany.
Yeah, it's great. It's an accurate representation of value as well.
So, Cam, we had you back in episode number 9 when Roll with the Punches was just a little seedling 41 episodes ago.
Oh, we're 41 now. Jeez,
41.
So it out.
This is number 51 that you're speaking on as we speak. So welcome back. Really excited. Now, since then, I have done a lot of diving deep into the PH360 epigenetic life. I've changed a lot of things in my life. I absolutely love it. It is mind-blowing. But in one of the courses last week, something twigged my ears when you guys brought up the very topic that I love revolving around. So you've heard a lot of my my guests on this show are they're first responders, and I love working with first responders because I've been working in their health and wellness club hub at Victorian Ambulance this year. And I'm really, really intrigued by trauma, and I'm intrigued by people who choose a career where they deal with a lot of physical and emotional trauma and how they manage that in their lives. And I love looking at the science and the statistics. And obviously, when we look at PH360 and epigenetics, it really ties in. And I just can't help but get curious around what can we see in people's physiology and what can we start to piece together around this topic. So you guys are the experts. I just want you to go for gold and blow my head off in this conversation. I don't even know where to start.
Well, I think it's probably good if you understand the rarefied air that we're all in, having Anne Larsen on our on the call. So just a little bit of background on me. I'm exercise physiologist and dietitian by trade, and I did my PhD looking at body composition and exercise and nutrition, how they come together. And I've spent the last 7 or 8 years educating health professionals on how your genes express in relation to the environment, which is pretty much life, and how we then put something really tangible in place for people to intervene in their lifestyle in the way that's most effective for their unique biology, because everyone is different. And obviously from this conversation stems this idea of trauma. And I said I was going to talk about Anne, but I am definitely getting there. I'm wanting to frame it really well. And so how we trauma and how we experience trauma is going to be different for different people. And I guess the best analogy I can think of is you imagine a sumo wrestler running into another sumo wrestler at top speed to try and lift each other out of the ring. You think about the stress that would put on that body, and they'd probably be resilient for it. You then think of a marathon runner up against a sumo wrestler in that same ring, and the trauma that a marathon runner would go through when he hits that sumo wrestler and gets bumped off the stage into the 4th row. There's a significant difference in how those two people experience exactly the same environment, but get a completely different traumatic experience from it. So much so, a marathon runner is not likely to go back into the ring. And so it's a really simple example. Obviously, we can talk about childhood, and I'm sure Anne will. But the reason Anne is here is because she is an absolute guru when it comes to family therapy and trauma specifically, and has been leading globally the application of the epigenetics frame to that. She's in charge of educating all of our health professionals, from medical practitioners, psychotherapists, psychologists, allied health professionals, fitness industry. She's had 30 years of experience working with individuals on trauma therapy and family therapy, and has run psychological practices, has supported psychologists with their own psychology. And so when it comes to navigating this conversation of, how people are different and how trauma will show up for them and what we can genuinely do about it, there isn't a better person on the planet. So, Anne, is there anything else you'd add to your intro there?
That's a lovely intro. Thank you, Cam. And I liked, I was thinking about the best way to do this. And Tiffany, I wasn't sure how much you wanted to lead it, but I was thinking maybe a good way to start, because of working with first responders, maybe I could just talk a little bit about trauma and what post-traumatic stress disorder is. So for about the last 15 years or so, I've really specialized in trauma. So in my private practice, until I met PH360 and just changed everything, and now have do a lot of work in the education space, that was really my specialty for a long time. And so I thought maybe I could just start there. And then Cam, after I talk about that for a while, I thought you're just a legend in having a conversation about those stages of stress with the health types. And then I thought I could come back and talk more about freeze and what that really means. And we can then have a conversation together about how we move out of that and have PH360 support people to move out of it. Does that sound okay to you?
That sounds amazing. And I just want to say, your bio, Anne, I am beside myself. How have you not landed in my hand sooner? I'm so excited about it. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. It's because I'm a diplomat and I'm constantly overwhelmed by how many children I have, now grandchildren, and just how many clients, right? So I hide and then Cam drags me out. And come on, which is
out
very
from the woodwork.
Yeah,
I love it.
Which is very kind of him, as in his mission to get as much great information and help to as many people as possible. So there's this, first of all, is this question about, so what is that trauma anyway? What is trauma and what is post-traumatic stress disorder? So I just want to say a bit about the history of that we have these two really different ideas about trauma. And one is what they call simple is the wrong word, because it doesn't allow for the terrible impact it can have. But we have trauma, which is a single incident, or even like a wartime experience, or what you're saying with first responders. And that's when we see people traumatized after like a massive event. But we also have what we call complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is a culmination of a lot of stressors. And the reason this is so important is there was a long time when in psychology they had this idea that was completely wrong. They told everyone the wrong thing. They said you can develop stress resilience by having a lot of trauma and managing it, like through your childhood, and then when the big guns come out and the big trauma hits you, we're sure you'll have a lot of stress resilience. The answer to that is no, that is incorrect. And when they did the research on war veterans, actually they saw the opposite. The war veterans that were really not only, but really suffering, they could see that they'd had these stressors, like some very major stressors beforehand. So the kind of work that I do is really all of those, right from very serious, complex childhood sexual abuse or sexual, psychological, physical abuse, that sort of work, and into the sort of the war veteran space. So that, I just think that's really important to understand. And that really a nice way to think of what this is that trauma is just a very extreme version of stress. We're not jumping, and you'll see this when Cam talks about these three levels, we're not jumping out of one thing into another as if it's a whole nother box. We've got this continuum of that, which is why there's that cumulative effect if you have lots of different trauma in your life. So now that we know that, all right, it's this accumulation that is going to be really painful, then we have to think, well, how do I describe that to people? And what I say is, the hand goes on the alarm. So we can go through that scientifically and say, what happens with our amygdala, our fear center. That's also really quite interesting about the amygdala. Just both of you stop me if I'm going down too much of a particular rabbit hole.
Love rabbit holes.
But the amygdala, which is, I think Goldie Hawn calls it the watchdog, but this fear center is so interesting because even it has two parts. Like we always have in our physiology a more primitive part and a more modern part. And the modern part is always wrapped around the more ancient part, which is just so interesting. And this is where we all went wrong in the modern world. We love the modern part of our brain. We love it. Let's talk about it. Let's be sensible and logical. We can just talk everything out. This is completely denying this other more primitive part of our brain. So when I started to understand trauma in this way just over 15 years ago, it changed everything, including how I just managed my own life and thought about my own life. So even the amygdala has a very, what we call a primitive part. So when we're on a weekend and one of our colleagues got really scared when a spider ran out and he ran out of the room really fast, things like spiders and snakes are part of our fear center. They're hardwired in because obviously as humans we needed to be scared of some things, and we can override that with some work. With something like exposure therapy, we can override it, but it is part of our natural way of being. Some things are definitely just innately traumatic, but then wrapped around that grows as we get older is another part of the amygdala, and that's learned fear. That's all the things we've learned from the time we've been born that say, warning, warning. That's how I say it's like just warning, warning, wake up, turn on the alarm's gone off, get going, get that sympathetic nervous system going, get the blood flowing, and because now you have to take action. So that's really, and so then when Cam talks about in a minute the 3 sections, Cam, when we talk about the third one, I view it as when we're in post-traumatic stress disorder, the alarm gets stuck on. Right? It's not necessarily completely in all the time, but it's also not released. So you very rarely end up in a happy place because that alarm is always turned on a bit. And that's where I know Cam will talk in a minute about where, how this affects the different health types. But the other thing that I want to say about this is so much of this new understanding came through some animal studies with a man called Peter Levine. He really changed the whole way we viewed this. And there's a recording, and it's a possum in the United States, a possum, and all these wolves have chased the possum. So this is one of the most sort of famous recordings in trauma, in training for trauma. So this poor possum has run and run. And then Cam, we'll go into this with you. It's in fight, flight, right? It knows warning, big, scary wolves, and it is running. And then it runs out of puff. It's only little. And there's a pack of wolves. And it gets surrounded by this. And now fight, flight doesn't work anymore. No fight, flight. It can't fight the wolves. It can't flee the wolves. It's surrounded. And do you two know what happens when a possum is surrounded like that and has got no hope of getting out of the situation?
I'm on the edge of my seat.
They freeze. Their body drops endorphins into their body. They're full and they just flop. And that's that thing, that expression, what's it called? Like playing dead, like a possum, playing possum is playing dead, because what they do is they flop. Their body becomes completely relaxed, or looks relaxed on the outside. And this is the same as like the deer in the headlights. Warning, but I can't do anything. I can't move. So this is what people think of as shock. They think when someone like freezes, that's shock. But really, this is part of that initial this initial reaction, again, that Cam will go into with the different health types. This is part they go into. And then on this video, it was so great that they got it. Then the wolves disperse. I actually had to say to my husband afterwards, why did the wolves walk away? And he said, this is what animals do. Wild animals, activators, no, the big cats, they... when the sport is over, they may not be hungry and they may actually just walk off. So all the wolves walk off, and then what does the possum do? This is just one of the most profound things that the whole research in trauma is based on. They start to shake. And this is a mistake we make. We often stop people from shaking because we think that shaking is trauma and shaking is shock. Shaking is your body coming out of shock. So when we come to another part of the conversation, I want to wheel around to what this means coming up, like completing a fight-flight cycle. But that shaking actually is that. So the little possum shakes, gets rid of all those hormones. How awesome. This is why no animal in the wild is traumatized. Do you know that? Only we can traumatize animals.
Wow.
But no animal in the wild suffers trauma, because they either die in that situation or they survive and they shake themselves out. Now, I just want to give a little quick personal example here about something that happened after I gave birth. And not the first time. The first time, so this was interesting. When I found this out, I didn't understand. Now I could look back and understand. So when I gave birth the first time, like many first-time mums, it's a bit of a shocking experience, and I was a bit sort of out of it for, like in shock, you'd say. I was a bit out of it, you know, for a week or so. But after I had my second child, my second birth, I didn't tell anyone this because I thought I was being crazy. It's great being a mental health professional because you never want to tell anyone the weird things that you do yourself. And I gave birth and I went into the shower after I'd, you know, done the initial bit, loved the baby. I went into the shower and I turned it on really hot and I started to shake. And I shook and I shook and I thought, this is really weird, Anne, because I didn't know this stuff. No one was talking about this in trauma. And I shook and I shook and I, you know, I could sort of tell intuitively, don't stop it. It would have been really hard to stop it anyway because it was such an innate response. It was coming from my limbic brain, that, as I was saying, our more primitive part of our brain, just shaking. So I just put the water on really warm and I just stayed in there until I stopped shaking. Now, what I understand now is I was like the possum, right? It's quite a shocking experience having a difficult birth, but I shook it out in the shower. And the difference that made is like even 12 hours later, really seriously, people were saying things to me like, you know, it's because I'm in the maternity ward and people are saying, what, did you just have a baby? And you know why that is? Because I didn't have any of those frozen elements about me, right? Because I just shook it all out.
Yeah, wow.
So they're the things that make me really excited about understanding trauma. And I'd like Cam to talk next about these 3 stages and the meaning that the different health types come. And then you and I get to talk about how all this helps us and help people get better, Cam.
Can I ask a quick question? This might be a huge rabbit hole. It might have a quick answer, or you might tell me that it's going to be covered later. But earlier when you mentioned the, you know, forcing people into trauma to get them resilient to trauma, it sort of sparked my interest around this whole theory of getting comfortable with getting uncomfortable. And I guess, you know, in some areas in life and sport and things, like I'm a boxer, so getting uncomfortable, getting in the boxing ring and getting uncomfortable with that and building a resilience to that. So I guess at some point, can we cover, so where's the line to that? Because there is some discomfort that we need to step into and it becomes comfortable and we build resilience, but at what point is it trauma and what point is it discomfort, and how do we manage that and understand it better?
Tiffany, you just couldn't have answered better, more like a question to help go into the nuance. So I'd just like to answer it right now because it's just such an awesome question.
Awesome.
It's so interesting because understanding trauma in this different way has changed the way that we think about what they call exposure therapy, which is, you know, expose someone to a challenging situation and then they meet that challenge and yay, everything's good. Or even flooding, where you put someone in a very difficult situation and they survive it and yay, again, all is good. So, but there's a trick to this. There's a trick to this because when you've suffered trauma, you learn to disassociate from your body. So if you think about a time when you've been, I don't know whether you've ever had this, but if you're really stressed, people talk about all the time if they give a speech and they don't remember what they said, or I performed really well. So in some way I performed really well, but I don't really remember it. And that situation still scares the hell out of me. Oh, why is that? If exposure and flooding works, why is that? Because of this. So the trick is, the way that challenging yourself works is when you really believe, and every part of your brain and body and heart believes that you did meet that challenge. So when I'm speaking to someone and they start telling me their story, their trauma story, and I see them stop breathing, it's like that they could push through Like you can push through. People can push through. Literally think about too when a man goes off to war, they clench their teeth. That actually, when you clench your jaw, it overrides this part of your limbic brain, and you just keep on moving forward. But you're not actually telling your body that this is a new safe place to be in. So we're just trying to create a challenge that the body can go into. So when I see someone telling me their story, they can tell me, they'll just re-traumatize themselves, because I can see they stop breathing. You've gone into freeze, you're no longer breathing. So I say, stop. Let's bring yourself back into your body. Let's breathe, and we'll talk about that later. But you see, this is such an important thing, because yes, you want to challenge yourself, and that does build resilience, but you don't want to challenge yourself so much that your fear center goes crazy and you say, I'm out of here. My body might be in this room or in this boxing ring or whatever, but I'm gone. So great question. Great
wow.
question.
This topic is, I am so fully embedded in this. Keep it up.
That's awesome. So, Anne, what context do you want me to really describe the stress cycles, just sort of how people go through there?
Yeah, I think the reason, because, you know, as I talked about it being a progression, that stress and trauma is a progression. And I think this is where PH360 offers something completely unique to this picture of trauma that I'm talking about, because as they talk about these 3 stages, which the last one is the freeze one I've talked about, but Cam's got a great way of explaining how the different health types fit into that.
Cool. So, what amazing introduction from Anne. That was awesome. And I don't hear Anne speak about this stuff enough, so it's really cool to be here. So generally when we're starting up this state of stress that eventually leads to, well, if it's big enough, becomes a trauma, we go through 3 main stages. And stage 1, so stage 0, essentially, which doesn't count, is called homeostasis, which is where things are in balance. And so you wake up in the morning, everything's pretty good. You go to the gym, you work out, you feel a little bit tired, you come back, and now your body feels stronger and you feel pretty good, but you're not stressing yourself. You're not recovering anymore. Your body's just relatively stable. That's homeostasis. However, in order to grow, we have to experience a stress. So stress is necessary as part of our life. In fact, if you don't stress enough, you end up with diabetes. If you sit down for 20 minutes, there is no stress placed on your muscles. You stop pulling blood sugar out of the blood. You don't pull it into your muscle. You stop burning fat tissue. You start accruing fat tissue as well. You start wasting away muscle. Your body under no stress becomes weaker. And so stress is necessary for growth. And that's why we have this beautiful loop that when you get stressed, we have an out clause as well, the shake or the recovery or whatever it might be, because it's actually necessary for our survival. And so the way that we move through those stages from a good stress point of view is it can be from an exercise point of view when you go to the gym. It can be when you are trying to learn new content for an exam tomorrow. You are in a state of stress and your brain goes, oh, I don't know this. And then you go to sleep and your brain recovers itself and assimilates that new information so that you can use it again. Exams, I guess, could be quite traumatic though. And this is why we don't remember all of it. And I'd be interested in that another conversation. But so essentially there's a couple of different analogies and I'll give you both. One is the pub brawl analogy, because I know you'll be into that, Tiff. And the other one is the racing start analogy. And so the pub brawl is you go into stage 1 of I've just been picked in a fight at the pub and we're going outside to start fighting. Tiff's big fist pumps. Let's do this. And so someone's just come over, has deliberately knocked my beer over and said, you and me are going outside, or I'm bashing up your 3 mates. I was like, well, you know, what's my decision here? I guess I'm going to have to go and do it. And so you decide to start walking outside to do whatever you got to do, because that's the only situation in this scenario. You have to go and fight. Not that I'm recommending this or condoning this in any way, shape or form, but it's for the purpose of understanding stress. So while you're walking out, you get stage 1. Stage 1 is your nervous activity increases, your neural activity. It says something about this environment needs all of your attention, because you need to be gathering as much data as possible so that you can create as much certainty in the future as possible. Stage one is what is coming. I've got to be ready. And so your nervous system lights up and starts getting anxious. And you'll also experience this in my third analogy in a job interview while you're sitting out there toiling away in your brain, or just before you start a 400-meter race, you're on the start line quivering, or even thinking about it before the race, and your neural activity is very, very high, but actually nothing is being demanded of your physical body yet. So that's stage one. Stage two is when you are now in the fight. The fight has begun. Your blood pressure has gone up. Your blood sugars have gone up. Your blood fats have gone up. And they have all gone up so that you can have more energy to deal with, more physical energy to deal with this stress that's happening right now. And so you're in there, you're taking a few blows, you're haymaking. If you haven't been to a tips boxing gym, then you're just giving it your best crack and your energy is higher than you could ever perceive. You're getting hit, you're in pain, you're getting tired, but you keep going because your body is resisting the urge to stop, resisting the urge to get out of the stress. This is called resistance phase, stage two. So we can occupy this space, and this resistance phase is when you're now 300 meters through that 400-meter race, when every muscle in your body just says, what the hell did I sign up to a 400-meter sprint for? Because there is no logical sense at all to gassing myself out and flooding my brain and body with lactic acid. It makes no sense. So 300 meters through, you resist by elevating blood pressure, doing all of these things that really support you in that moment. And then after the battle, you wake up the next morning and all you want to do is sit on the couch and do nothing. You go into stage three, and that's exhaustion or temporary fatigue. And so your body, this is how it closes the loop. Okay, something was about to happen, something did happen, but in order to grow from this experience, we have to rest our body. So I'm going to create fatigue. I'm going to create demotivation. I'm going to create the urge to sleep, create the urge to eat. And this is what exhaustion feels like, where you can recover. Because if you stress and then recover, your body learns. But often what happens is that we wake up with 4 hours of sleep on one morning, and we get up, we have our coffee, and because we are now physically having to use our energy to stay awake through the day, we go into stage two. Our blood pressure increases, our attention increases, our resources increase so that we can get through the day. And then how exhaustion plays out, it plays out mentally by you get home at the end of the day and you start snapping at all your loved ones because you're tired, and you have no filter over, I really want to take care of my family. As you become more stressed, your ability to look after other people diminishes. And so you care less about what they need and you just get what you need, and that's quiet and rest and no noise or whatever it might be. And so you start snapping at people, even though you've just been this perfectly behaved person in stage two resistance phase all day long for the people that you don't even like that much at work, but you might like them as well. So you've performed really well. You've resisted the urge to tell your workmates what you really think of them, but then that creates an exhaustion mentally. The same thing goes for when you go for a workout. You do a really tough workout, your muscles get really fatigued and sore, and they make you stop working out those muscles in a temporary exhaustion so that you can grow and get stronger, because your body has said, this environment is stressful for me. It's been too heavy or it's been too arduous. So I need to take some time, reconfigure my phenotype so that I can deal with this stress better again. And so this is that very important exhaustion stage three, exactly what Anne was describing. But then you go for, you go for 6 months of stage two stress where you're waking up with 5 hours sleep repetitively, and you just feel like you're on all of the time, and your body actually wants to go into exhaustion, but instead you caffeinate and you get more stuff on your plate so that your blood pressure can stay up, so that your blood sugars can stay up to provide you that energy. And so after 6 months, what happens when you're in stage two stress, your immune system suppresses itself. And so your immune system doesn't recover anything. All the bacteria build up in your body, and your viruses actually now have way more time to play and to get into your cells and change some things, so that when you finally do rest on holidays, you get sick because your body says, oh, good. Now that we're through this resistance phase and the saber-toothed tiger isn't trying to catch us anymore, I can now commit my energy to rest and recovery. And so I'm going to make you incredibly tired for the next 2 weeks so that I can fully recover and get rid of all of this stuff that I missed in resistance phase. Because resistance phase is about coping. It's not about thriving. It's getting through the stress. And we often spend far too much time in that resistance phase. But then we have the then we have the longer term, which is where you're essentially in, a grade of resistance phase for years, let's say 20 years of work and kids and socializing and alcohol swilling and, network lunching and all of that sort of stuff. And you end up with heart disease. This is exactly what creates from being in resistance. You end up with high blood pressure for a long period of time, high blood fats running around your body for a long period of time, blood sugars running higher in your body for a long period of time, all to get through life, but not really ever getting that recovery. And so your body then says, great, thanks. I'm going to take 6 months off and we're probably going to need some new arteries. I'd really love those. That'd be great. Put an order in for that. And then I can't move for 6 weeks. This is exactly what I wanted. I wanted this exhaustion. And so in order to, probably the most important thing out of all of this is that when we are stressed, we need that avenue to allow ourselves fatigue, allow ourselves low motivation, and see it as our body is recovering. And so then when it gets into the health types, we interact with these 3 stages very, very differently. So, and one example, the leanest of us, they're the sensors, the individuals with the finest and the smallest skeleton, the least amount of muscle, the least amount of fat tissue. They have a very sensitive digestion and a very, very active mind. And the reason that they have a very active mind is because they developed more predominantly out of a part of the embryo when they were in their mother's womb that was more aligned with developing their nervous system and skin more than the musculoskeletal system or their digestive system, which are found in other parts of the embryo. And so as this person then develops and grows, they grow with this very powerful nervous system, very sensitive skin, but not much muscle and not much digestion, not much capacity to store fat. And so their survival strategies, you drop them in the wild, their survival strategy is think. I'm going to have to think my way out of this. And what I'm going to do, because I'm not ready to fight, because I don't have much muscle, I don't have much bone, I'm actually very likely to get beaten in this fight. What I'm going to do is I'm going to constantly stay more aware of the surroundings and have a greater outflow of nervous energy, essentially all of the time, so I can gather as much data as possible. And so you can now see that this body is perfectly designed to be in stage 1 stress, for the majority of their life. Like they love this space because this creates an ability to always be collecting data to create certainty in the future so that they can be safe, because their body doesn't want to be in a fight. It doesn't want to get to resistance phase 2. It actually wants to go to stage 1, resolve everything, and then get somewhere safe, because their capacity to endure and cope is actually lower because they don't have as much cortisol, and then they don't have much ability to put mass on. And so because they don't have that mass as security, because mass is security in the wild, they want to spend as little time as possible in resistance phase stage 2. But if they do, they get a very extensive stage 3, and they get very tired and very strong fatigue because their body needs to really recoup. So, but we then have a very different body as well, which is it develops more predominance in the musculoskeletal system, the sex organs, the kidneys and adrenals. And this body turns out to be like the wonderful Tiffany, that has a little bit more muscle, They have there it is, big bicep. You can't see it at home, but it's there, I think. I'll just zoom in, wait. Then but they also, from this adrenal and sex organ dominance that happens in their development, they have more testosterone and more adrenaline. And so when they get put into the jungle, they don't think as much. They're actually looking for confrontation. They are looking for the fight because...
I know.
Yeah, right? And so because when they experience testosterone and adrenaline, what they experience is home base for them. They go, oh, this is what I'm designed to do. I'm designed to attack stuff and confront stuff physically because I have that aggression there, which is really, really important. This is the same energy that creates lateral thinking and innovation. And it's, I want to confront things and do things differently is what this creates too. So there's a real strength to this. But you put that person into the wild and they're looking for stuff to kill, right? And this is because the way that they're set up, as opposed to the previous person, the sensor, is looking for things to create safety up in a treetop somewhere where they can set some traps and be very intelligent about how they actually find food and all of that sort of stuff. And so you send these two people off to war, And what we see is that the individual with a very fine, delicate bone structure and less muscle tissue, just having a 35 kilo pack on and carrying a weapon, just doing that adds so much more biological stress to their system because they have less capacity, less physical strength generally. And this isn't a detrimental thing. It's just the way this body has developed. They also have a heightened nervous system, and the heightened nervous system then makes them more aware of sounds and noises and explosions, and even they pick up on the vibes of other people more as well. They're like a little antenna wire, and so the fear will really influence them too. And this is why we see back in the day the thickness of your ribs was actually a determinant as to whether you could go to war or not, because they knew that if you weren't thick enough through the ribs, you didn't have the capacity, the physical capacity to prevent extra trauma. And so we saw much higher rates of PTSD in those very slender individuals who go into a battle state. Whereas the second person we spoke about, they've got this confrontational kind of body that they're very happy to go into a fight. They're not as sensitive neurally, and they actually love sitting in this resistance phase. They don't actually think about the drama. What they did in the pub brawl is, as soon as the beer was knocked over, they just hit someone in the face. It's like, I didn't have to go through stage 1. I'm now in stage 2, and I'm in the fight because that's where I'm strong. I'm strong when it comes to action. Versus we have the third person who is and obviously everyone has their own individual variation of this, but we've got 6, but I'm going to talk about 3, and you can look at other resources to give you more information on this. But the third person is developing out of the digestive organs more predominantly. And because of that, they grow more muscle because they're able to conserve their mass better. They have a naturally nurturing and protective mentality, which comes along with higher prolactin levels, higher IGF-1. And also they have these more insulin resistance, which makes them able to gain more muscle, gain more fat tissue. And so this is you take that person, and they're like they've got a cushion against the rest of the world and the trauma that might get thrown at them. They're actually physically more resilient. And the higher prolactin that they have is a neural regenerator as well. It actually supports the regrowth of neurons. And so we see less sort of strain being placed, or more recovery of the nervous system when they are put under trauma. And so they're just tireless in the way that they can, the typical mother who's been heavy her whole life, wakes up at 5 a.m. at the crack to make sure that the house is clean and the kids are ready. Then they go off to work at one of their 2 jobs. They work double overtimes. They come home, they cook, they clean, they prepare. Then they wake up and they rinse and repeat for 23 years. And they seem to not fatigue. They seem to just be able to keep going. And this body is the most resilient. But what's interesting is that all of the hormones in their body, when they experience stress, their prolactin makes them always be caring for other people. And so if they're experiencing stress, they automatically assume that everybody else in their community is experiencing stress as well. They also have this innate knowledge that they are the most resilient, and their brain in stress goes to, how can I support other people? So what happens when they experience stress, their body slows down. The first one, the sensor, their brain speeds up. The second one, their body and action speeds up. In the third, this person speeds up their capacity to gain mass. And so they actually get demotivated to act. They want to do less exercise. They want to crave more foods, because what they're trying to do is to create more mass, because mass is safety, which means I can now eat less and support my family. And so they actually gain weight. This is the typical, and when they go into exhaustion phase, which is where they live, when they get stressed, their body goes, oh, I'm exhausted. I better slow down. I better crave a little bit more because I've just spent all my energy. Now my family's at risk. Now I need to gain a little bit more mass so that my family can be safer, because I'll be there to support them, and I'll be able to give away my food and be able to tolerate the famine, essentially. And so we have these 3 stages that people move through, but how we enter those stages are actually different based on who we are. But the most important thing with all of this is that wherever your state of being is, for example, the first person, they are very active neurally, and so neural rest will be the way that helps them recover fastest, versus the second person is very physical, and They sit in that blood pressure state. They sit in the physical mechanics, like the movement state. And so for them to recover best, they need to do a lot of physical recovery. Versus for the last individual, this person is going to be stressed with their metabolism. When they're stressed, they're going to accumulate mass. And so the way that they can recover is to actually almost semi-fast and actually release a lot of that energy by creating calm and security in their family around them as well, because that's the reason that they're stressed in the first place. So when you think about those bodies, and obviously you can all think of the different people, when that person enters an environment, how they respond to that environment is going to be completely different. You know, an activator, which is the middle person, they get in a fight and they go, whoa, how awesome was that? Like I literally got in there, had a few swings, took a few beats, and then he's high-fiving his mates, and there's no trauma associated with that. But then the sensor gets into that exact same thing, and because they are so sensitive and they have far less cope, their body experiences so much more pain. They're so much more aware of that environment. That is a very traumatic experience because their physical is so threatened. Versus the last person, it's like, what happened again? Like, you know, this guy took a few swings at me, but I just gave him a bear hug and all is fine. Like, you know, we don't need to fight this out. Let me buy you 5 more beers, even though you just spilt mine. I just prefer to look after you and we can all get along. You know, this is the devastation of a Pacific Islander on the rugby pitch with all the guys generally that are my, you know, 80 kilos and 178 and not really built for running into 120 very, very mobile, very, very strong Pacific Islanders who break bones and then get off the field and go, oh, thanks for the game. It was so great to play with you. And I'm just thinking this was the most traumatic experience of my life. And they've thought, I've just made a new mate because we've now got rugby in common. So, you know, as we enter into any environment, our biology and how we've developed drives how we perceive that environment, what turns that into trauma, and even how we have to recover from that will be very, very different for each of us as well. And so this is where it's very important to start this process of just listening to your body. And I guess with that, I'd love to hand it over to you for some questions, or Anne with something that she might want to add.
I am, like, you have no idea how excited I get with these conversations. What I just find it completely revolutionizes the way that we look at stress. So one of my things I'm always talking about is this idea about our identity and how we attach it to our mental health. And our mental health is just a continuum of our biology, because when our biology gets stressed, our hormone balances change, and that essentially that changes the reactions that we have. So essentially, it kind of changes who we are moment to moment. So, like, I hear that, and I think to myself, there's so much stigma wrapped around PTSD and the ability to cope, especially so one of my questions, I guess, was always, is there a biological type? Is there a health type that's more drawn into these particular roles? Or is there a historical experience? Is it people that have had trauma that seek trauma? And the reason I ask that is because personally, I've fumbled around through life, moved to Melbourne, found myself at 29 years old standing in the centre of a boxing ring going, oh, for some reason this feels like home. I don't really know why. And then after a couple of years, I was like, oh, there's some childhood shit going on. And I had a breakdown and some stuff come out, and I went, oh, wow, like that's where my fascination is. It's like, what is there something drawing some people, not everyone, of course, but is there something drawing some people into this line of work that revolves around a situation where their biology is placed into being amongst and around and responding to trauma, because on some level, may it be big or small, that it resonates. And like you just said, that can be emotional or psychological or mental trauma, or, you know, it could be any range of things for so many different people. God, I'm just rambling now because I'm so excited. Pick something out of what I've just said and run with it, Anne. Go.
Okay, I'll say something about that. That's a hard question that we probably can't answer easily, about who are the people that end up. We know some really nice things about first responders, and they often have a really beautiful affinity with animals and often use animals a lot. So let's just say this is an amazing intuitive understanding of what helps me feel more calm in that situation. So, and I have to throw in something about PH360 too, because you use the word self-identity. So until PH360, of course, this is absolutely my area of expertise. I'm thinking of identity and our construction of our identity as very much a construction of our identity. Comes from our environment, comes from what people have said, comes from approval, disapproval. You know, it's so complex. Now, all of that is still true, but that is sitting on something that's even more complex, which is our neurobiology. And this is where PH360 changed everything for me. Because then you say, well, is this really, like, so if you're I'm a mental health social worker by trade, I know another social worker, censor, working in a prison. Now, we're going to say in general, just from what Cam said, if we just extrapolate that out into what you're asking, we go, well, maybe for a censor, a woman being faced with a prison environment is not an ideal match. Now, you could have created an identity, which is, I'm really resilient. I am great with difficult situations. I'm completely committed to this. And then we will fight our neurobiology, right? Our sense of identity can literally fight with our neurobiology. And it does all the time, because then we have this great thing called commitment. It's great. Unless you keep on being committed to something and you've already gone over that line, because all of these health types can end up in that freeze situation. And it's really a slippery slope, because when our amygdala turns on, our limbic brain, when we're fully going and when the alarm is on, you know what it does first? It shuts down our prefrontal cortex. It shuts down our thinking. And that is because if it's not all that useful, if I was just saying, so you're at the river, at the river, and you're washing the clothes, you got your kids around you, and a crocodile comes up at you, you can't be thinking, right, I think that I can run at this pace, the crocodile's probably going to run at that, it's too long, right? So when you go into this unconscious part of your brain, everything that you've ever kind of accumulated, every experience is in there. So, you know, this is a whole nother topic about trauma, but this is the point. We've got all this information in our limbic brain, which is not available to us. And Tiff, that's why you can end up in the middle of a boxing ring going, what the hell? And all this stuff is just dumped on me. Where is this from? The answer is it's from your limbic brain. And often people, because as you said, there's this ridiculous divide between mental and other health. That's the other thing I want to say. This PTSD thing, it is physiological. It means that your hypothalamus has been pushing so hard, getting it through that pituitary, into your adrenals, and it hasn't stopped. It keeps going. And it should do a beautiful feedback loop. Now, the activator can do that for longer, right? Because you can keep pumping out the adrenaline. Awesome. You know, that's what Cam's saying. You can stay in resistance for a lot longer. But everybody will run out, because what happens is that it's a beautiful feedback loop, and eventually you feed back and you're to the hypothalamus, chill out now. It's that time for a break that Cam's talking about. We're in time for rest and relax. But if we don't do that, we get out of balance. So the loop stops. We just end up on this slow drip of cortisol. And this is also where we see with the different health types. Some people can present as just, I'm in freeze, like I'm literally just can't move anymore and can't do anything, which, as Cam said, we'll see particularly that response out of the endomorph. Or we see hypervigilance, like they live together, but some people will express one more than the other, with what Cam was saying with the sensor. The best way, I'm in this terrible state where the alarm is never just completely released. And so going back to about the first responders, there can be many, many reasons for why you could end up being in there. But one of the things that I find with a lot of my clients over the years, they'll say to me, oh, I would really like to use my experience in the therapy field or whatever. And you definitely can do that. But you always have to make sure that whatever you're doing is not just re-traumatizing yourself, and that you're not overriding your system all the time. And how do you know that you're constantly overriding? You push it away. You know, you just keep on shoving it away, and you just keep on going. Exactly what Cam said. I'll just have another coffee. I'll just take a deep breath, clench my jaw, and I'll just go ahead and do it. And if I ever stop long enough to take a breath, I don't like it, because suddenly I feel how berserk my body is on the inside. But that is what has to come. And when that doesn't get addressed, then that ends up being this massive problem in the end. And of course, Cam couldn't help himself but such about solutions. Thank you, Cam. So beautiful about what PH360 offers in that. But from from the trauma point of view, just think safety. So, it's another topic about how we complete this fight-flight cycle. But really, you can hear from all of this, if the alarm is on, there's no safety. That's what Cam was talking about. All this stuff is going on. So whether you're getting that earlier from the sensor brain of warning, I'm super aware, or whether that's I'm really tiring out now, and now actually the world is no longer a safe place. I've just adrenalized myself too much and caffeinated myself too much, or whether it's that endomorph who now is barely moving, can't handle anything, used to be a lovely caring person, no longer can do that. Then we have to look at, well, then where do we find those solutions? Then this is where PH360 is magic at taking steps away from stress. So of course, I'm going to say here, disclaimer, if you're suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, see somebody who specializes in that. But I've never seen anything, because PH is based on these epigenetics, we get all these great solutions to how is this body safe? And this becomes the massive key, because whether you see a therapist or not, you need to know how to keep your body safe. It's the core part of this. And Cam, I want to say something more about that.
Yeah, well, that's exactly on my, I was just making a couple of notes as I was going along, and it was precisely on that bit of 2 points. One, what creates safety for different bodies? Yes. And then also how we navigate any situation with our natural strengths. And so the first bit is, what is that feeling of safety? It's not necessarily a mindset that says I'm safe. For the person who's very, very light and very delicate and not much muscle tissue and not much fat tissue with a very, very heightened nervous system, a sense of safety for them is an environment that is completely quiet with virtually no neural input. And so for them to return to a place of safety, and they'll search it, they'll go to a room by themselves, they'll make sure that they're super warm, they will have a list of things that they're working through, or do nothing at all and just completely piece their mind out, and we often recommend a bath for these individuals, like a really warm bath with low lighting, because what that does to their physiology is it says this environment right here is safe, because the alarm system that you have, which is your nervous system, doesn't need to be active, because we've created certainty around this. And so what we've seen as well is that when people are in their safe spot, that's when we can more consciously interact with these subconscious stories that play out that can come from trauma. And so we can start processing these in a much more aware state.
And can I just add to that too, is that what you're doing when people are doing that and using the right strategies for their body, is that they are literally saying, you must be safe because you're in a quiet room in a warm bath. It's biofeedback. It's using this understanding to create your own biofeedback loop, because often say, but when you sit, if you're going to sit cross-legged and with your arms out, because when you are in alarm, you're like this, right? The body hunches over. It hides your digestive system, like all your guts, and hides your all your sex organs, everything on the outside, it protects it. So what we're doing in different ways is saying, look at this biofeedback. If I'm lying in a warm bath in a beautiful quiet room, there must be no danger. Like, it's so powerful the way that works.
Whereas for another person, and this is the person with the musculoskeletal dominance, with the higher output from their sex hormones and their adrenaline, lying in a bath for 30 minutes might actually create more irritation, because I just need to move. I actually need to physically move this energy. And they'll have this need when they get some sort of stress, they will have an uprising of energy that will come out either as sharp tongue traits or it needs to come out physically. And so this person, instead of dialing out their nervous system, they actually need to activate their musculoskeletal system. And so going out and doing a HIIT session where their brain can switch off, their body can almost be exhausted, but they get to express all of the stuff that comes up. And that's exactly what you've experienced, Tiff. You've been able to put yourself in a place where you've been able to express everything so that your body feels like it should. You know, it felt active. It blew that energy out so that it doesn't have this competing frustration. And so now you're interacting with yourself in a much more conscious way. That stuff that was always there has come up to be interacted with because your body is safe. Versus for another individual, the protective, the nurturing body, what creates safety for them is understanding that their family is secure. And so being around their family in a low stress environment where they just get to care and nurture, that's one element that might create safety. And another one is where they actually get to take time away from their family to have an hour of just time to themselves. Because in order for them to have time for themselves, they have to consciously interact with this idea that their family is safe and doesn't need to be helped right now. And so when they get that experience, it allows them to experience their own sense of safety and security because now the people that they care about are also safe. But it's not necessarily being warm. They would actually overheat in the bath because they're a lot more insulated. They actually just need to spend time doing a bit of self-care, whether it be, you know, a walk along the beach or just some low maintenance, low risk stuff that's very easy. And that creates that recovery for them. And I guess all of that then leads into, and I just want to pick up on that one thing that Anne said about the prison scenario and how we can have a resilient mindset. We know that the first person, the skinny non-fighter person who goes into prison would have a lot more to worry about in prison physically. But what they can do using their mind, they can say, oh, I can totally identify that my nervous system is going to be heightened here. So I'm going to double down on the meditation when I can. And I'm going to, you know, slow my breathing down whenever I'm walking through, you know, the food hall. I know that I'm going to get things done if I just go through my list of how to protect myself. You know, I'm going to create physical barriers where I can. I'm going to inform myself on how I stay safe because that's neurally entertaining how that person stays safe. And now they can pair this resilience with the data that their brain needed versus the activator goes into prison and looks to become the alpha and bash everyone up or show that they've got a bit of heart and get in there. Not that I'm condoning that either, but also where they can lean into it is, you know, by going out and physically getting stronger and exerting themselves and using competition within themselves to like, you know, I'm going to get through this day without doing X, you know, without some sort of fear response. And I'm going to compete with myself or others. Like, how's everyone else coping? I'm going to cope better than they are, you know, making it actually a social competitive environment is going to give them that adrenaline and testosterone, but in a way that supports their resilience. Whereas another person who comes in might say, I'm actually going to look out for some people here. I'm going to align myself with the crew that makes me safe, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to protect them and have protection from them too, so that I can feel my family. I'm going to touch base with the people that I love and make sure that they're safe at home. All of this is then going to allow me to be resilient because I'm getting the things that I need to. And so this is where we're able to deal. So two major points from what I wanted to say, and that is how we deal with stress. Firstly, we need to know what our safe spot is. We need to know biologically what is going to create that safety so that we can start interacting with our thoughts in a more productive way. And the second thing is, if you understand your biology, you can then apply your strengths to deal with any situation with your own flavor that allows you to hold that very resilient mindset and be in that growth as opposed to stagnation or even deterioration when it comes to mindset. So they'd be the big things that sort of come out of this for me. Is we have an incredible amount of ability and power to actually take control if we have good awareness and knowledge.
Yeah. I was thinking before when Anne was talking, when we were talking about, you know, how we are under stress. And well, I was thinking about when I box and and I've talked about this in a prior podcast for some of my listeners who have heard a bit of it before. But when I first started boxing, one of my biggest strengths in the boxing ring was this, just, forge forward, couldn't feel a punch, couldn't feel a thing, walk back at the end of the round and ask what happened, how to go, because I had no awareness in there. It was just go in, do my thing. No emotion ever came out in the ring. And it was a real strength because we just walk forward. No one could poker face. No one could see what was happening. And as a fighter, that's a real strength because you can't be read. And as I had a 3-year break between competing and went back last year, and in between those 3 years, I did a lot of therapy, because after a couple of years in the ring, I was like, all right, I'll probably need some therapy here, because all of these strengths that I had identified in myself growing up until 29 years of resilience, of mental, of independence, of, decisiveness, there were some really big strengths and things that people would always tell me and look up to me for. And as I started to ask myself some questions related to the boxing ring, it's like, what if, and then these old memories would come up, and I was like, what if these strengths are actually not strengths? What if they're this coping mechanism that's behaviorally developed because of this stuff that happened that is, so, what if I'm actually not that independent? I'm just so scared of connection and vulnerability that it's far easier to step in the ring and get a punch in the face and be told that I'm really tough and independent and can look after myself than it is to let people in and, all that sort of jargon. Anyway, long story short, 3 years of therapy, go back to boxing, and I had this underlying sense of, who am I going to be in that boxing ring now? Because that's the one place where you see yourself before that you can't wear a mask, because, as you guys know, your subconscious, your unconscious, everything, your reactions do what they do before your conscious mind can think. So if you're going to fight or flight, that happens before you get to take the you that's in there thinking takes control. So that's where I learned about who I am. And I thought to myself, well, who am I going to be? Because I've over 3 years started to feel an emotion here and there and understand them, and maybe develop a little bit of self-compassion and self-love. And mark my words, the first day I got in and sparred someone, I felt emotions. I felt anxious. I had a lot more trouble controlling my reactions to getting hit, because I had more I didn't want to get hit anymore. I wanted to keep myself safe. And I was feeling things that I'd never felt before. And so I had to walk into the ring and go, all right, that's cool. So I guess my idea around talking about that is, when we're in these roles out in the world, like whatever we choose to do, sometimes something is a strength, but if it's detrimental to us, it's not really a strength. So, and some of these things are things, especially for a first responder, and it might not be a paramedic like I'm working with, it might be law enforcement officers are always very, there's such a stigma to being okay that we don't want to peel away that layer, but that layer's there whether we answer to it or not. So I guess, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I want to say something about that. You're so awesome, because this is this whole thing, like as a therapist, I moved away from what they call strength-based therapy, right? So it's not that I don't think a strength is good, but what about this, Tiffany? You still have this thing, it's an attribute, but you can have a relationship with it, right? You're not strong or not strong. You're not a great listener and not a great listener. You're not kind and unkind. In fact, because exactly that's right. It's just like you can say, well, anything that someone can see as a strength can become a massive burden, as your expectation and everyone else's expectation is that you always are like that, right? So it's much more interesting to say, I've got this kind of attribute going on, and also with PH360, you get a better idea about what are those natural attributes. So we know with you, see what you've combined, which is beautiful, is the activator need to be physical and the warrior, and you're doing that beautifully. But hey, you also need to express yourself. So it's really interesting that you had hidden that part, hidden the expressing yourself part, because that was the bit that got frozen. And you could still express yourself in a sense physically, like take action, because you're definitely an activator and you could do that. But I think this is what's so powerful, is anyone who thinks about a strength it's really great for them to say, it's for everyone. They're always a double-edged sword of how far do I go into this. So we don't deny them. Beautiful. It's great having a strength. But it's just like me saying, look, I had a blinding flash of the obvious the other day, which was, I'd say one of my strengths would be that I'm really there for people. I'm very good at that. And I'm good at problem solving with people, and people want my advice and help or whatever, not just at work, but, in general in life. And then I had this blinding flash of the obvious that I was always thinking that I needed to be there, and that, I may as well make the most of it. And that was like a strength of mine. And then I realized it's never going to calm down, and you need to put barriers around that, right? People aren't going to stop asking you for that. So yeah, it's a strength. But what about everyone just goes, and so awesome, like Cam wants to send everyone to me, and so awesome, she can do this and this. But then what about when it's like, yeah, but hang on, there's a point where that's no longer a strength for me. It's something that's burdening me. So I think that was a really great example, Tiff. But even how that looks, the strengths and where you need to maybe make some boundaries, underneath it will be tied to your profile. When you really see what are your total winners and what are your things that you need to be careful about. But yeah, I'd say for everybody, think about the relationship that you have with your strengths, as well as just saying, no, it is one. And then the other side of that coin is, when we're not vulnerable, when we embrace our vulnerability, we are never weak. If you are the first person to say, and, I've done this with Cam, and when I've been pushed to the wall and said blah, blah, then what does it matter? No one can say, oh, well, Anne's not coping or that person's not coping, because once you own that vulnerability, there you are. And you're the strongest that you possibly can be. So I think we're all going for this combo, loving my strengths, utilizing everything to my best, but bringing my vulnerabilities with me, and knowing that is also awesome, because that's part of our humanity.
Yeah. And I think sometimes just looking at what's driving the strength. Why have I got this strength? They don't just come from anywhere. Well, mine didn't. They came from very distinct things, and then they were built on, and because they're a strength, then you build and build and build and build. It's not till you start asking the question. Like I started boxing. My first question was, I don't stick at anything. I don't stick at anything that I'm not already good at, and I don't stick at anything that makes me so damn uncomfortable all the time. But some components of this sport are resonating on this beyond intellectual level. It was like something's resonating in a way that I can't even put to words to it, and there were a few aspects of the boxing ring and the scenario that I did a lot of writing about it, but it was just questioning why, and then those memories popped up, and I was like, oh, that's weird, I haven't thought about it for 20 years. And then I started thinking and researching on this and the relationship with becoming an adult and past experiences, and I was like, oh, all right, those things those badges of strength I've been wearing could be a little bit of bullshit.
The one of the really interesting quotes that sort of links into that a little bit is it came from our weekend, and that is we will learn the information that we will acquire the information that we need to become who we're designed to be. And so this is where, and the example he used at the time, this is our chief medical officer, probably one of the smartest men on the planet when it comes to health. And he was talking in the context of how people learn. So your body naturally gravitated towards something where your body had an innate knowledge. Your body is designed to do that. And so that became appealing to your body, and the continuation of it became easy. And the example that he used was, if you get a kitten, it will learn how to hunt. Even a domestic kitten will teach itself how to hunt because it acquires the knowledge that it needs to become what it's designed to be. And whereas if you teach it to not hunt and get it to eat a vegan diet and live that gathering lifestyle, it gets sick. And this is where our bodies have different designs, and it's understanding that in the first instance of what does come naturally. Where do I feel comfortable and flow? because that's often a good sign. And the trouble with trauma is that sometimes it can block our visibility of what feels safe, what feels right, that learned component of our brain. And so it might be something that we've actually pushed away, but in fact, it's best for our biology. And that's the complexity. But by putting ourselves into an environment that is safe, but also allows us to express our strengths, there's really wonderful release that can happen in that space. And what I wanted to ask Anne, I don't know how much time I got, but I wanted to ask this question. Is that okay, Tiff?
That is fine. That is fine. Ask away.
Yeah, is how do we support like people with PTSD? How do we support them? Like, what's the approach that you'd get, partners and family to take with that? Because obviously it's tough, and some people aren't ready to just be vulnerable and have it all out, and that may kick off something else that's really quite dangerous. So what are some of the strategies there
that family members of the person with the trauma would manage? Okay. Yeah, so number one, this is always a big question. Sometimes people say to me, but why should it be me? Why do I have to be the one that compromises or is the bigger person or knows? My answer to that is, well, A, because you're the one in the room with me, and B is because if you come from a position of, if someone, so first of all, I'm not saying, people, Cam, you're making me do all these disclaimers, like people can be abusive, and I'm not saying that you should stay in a relationship where people are abusing you. So just remember that I'm not talking about that. But I'm saying if you've got a commitment to someone and you can see that they're suffering, then actually even the health type stuff can really, well, not even, really helps understand, well, how would I support this person through that stress? So we know that what we want to do is allow them to express themselves in a way that's not going to harm you, but in a way that health type will express themselves in health. So if you're with a partner, an activated partner with trauma is going to be feisty. They are going to be expressing, their warrior is going to be on. So rather than, so when you can think, so this is all about this perspective, that higher perspective of saying, well, I know this isn't really about me. This is you, and this is you being in a really bad place. But so I can either just remove myself, good thing if someone's going off the head at you, or you can also be saying to that person, you need to express yourself. What's real? Do you remember it's really good for you? Like, go for a run. Oh, yeah. I need to do that. I really need to do that. But I think there's this underlying Cam of everything, which is, can I hold this space with someone and for what's going on with them? And if I can, I just support them in a way. And, let's say you don't know the health type, but if a feisty person is going off, their prefrontal cortex is shut down. You do not reason with them. You don't try and make it rational. You just help them express in a way that is productive for the both of you. And the same thing, when you've got that, if there is if it's someone of a larger, body, a more energy conserving body, having a meltdown, well, I'm going to say to you, you push them really hard, because it takes a long time for that body to start expressing their distress to you. And if they're doing it, remember that safety is in having, that I'm here, I've got people around me, stay with them, and don't worry that they feel like they need to have in that moment, whatever that have is, whether it's a bit more food or it's I'm not buying too much on the on eBay or something. It's like I've got this desire to have. It's not exactly perfect, but it's something that you can talk through and say, I can just see that this is you in stress. And so I can be there. I mean, there's always I can be open to hear you, but what I want to be careful is that people who are what we call at the bottom of the circle, people who like to think in a logical, sequential way, often we're really doing the wrong thing by people at the top of the circle, Tiff, where you are, trying to get you to sit down and just blah, blah, and make all sense of it in some order, when really we'd be much better off going for a run with you, or saying, let's just go and have some fun by going to do this, and to be tuned into that person. So you may see your family member in trauma when you talk about the sensor. Well, actually, you do need to leave them alone. You do need to give them much more space. Now, you're not doing that with your guardian partner or child. They need you to be there. They don't feel safe unless that part of nurturing is being met. But for that other body shape, that sensor, we're saying, I'm going to allow you to express. So everyone is going to express the stress in a different way. And our job is to remember, guess what, everyone? Everyone is not like us. You know, and that question of, you seem to be stressful to me. What is happening? What can I do to help? When people are really stressed or in trauma, they might say they don't know, in which case, pay attention and do that. Is it happier days when I move away? Or is it happier days if I'm there? Or for me, with my partner who's on the top of the circle, and I realized one day through PH360 that when he's really upset, all I need to do is try and make him feel good, not try and have a long conversation about all the meaning of that, right? So just paying attention to those things, and you can learn by watching a person, but having, you know, some idea about how these different body shapes are expressing their stress is a really good idea. I also have to say, for the guardians, one thing under stress is they talk a lot, and people will feel like they might be talking at them. Just let them. So if you're with someone who's saying, stop it, I don't want to talk, that's because they're a sensor. They want to go into a room on their own and stop. If they want to just talk all the time to you, allow them to do that. You don't have to come up with solutions for them. They just need to engage through these long, deep conversation.
It is a powerful conversation and a powerful topic, and it's so funny because it's the same conversation as we've had from a more physical sense, talking about bodies, and obviously because I've grown up for the last few years in health and fitness and training people and thinking from that physical standpoint, but I've, you know, having the same conversation and talking about trauma and stress and how we cope with things. It's just like, no wonder this is such a problematic and a difficult area where we're trying to, because, you know, even take experience aside, you just look at biology and, you know, we've got people out there fumbling our way through it, trying to put in support for people, trying to do a better job, but it's just impossible because we're trying to put square pegs in round holes, and you just can't do that. And it's kind of crazy, but kind of cool that hopefully we're moving forward to something a better way.
Yeah, totally. And that's the biggest thing out of all of this is, well, probably one of the things I keep coming back to with this whole conversation, particularly when we're dealing with our own stress and other people's stress, is that our body only has one priority, and that is survive. And our body is always adapting to create survival for us. Yeah. And if we have a trauma, then we'll create a pattern that helps us avoid that again. And so, or it can sometimes, you know, it can even get to a point where it's actually more threatening to do anything else but step into that trauma. But either way, our body is trying to get to a place of known certainty and safety. And if we're always having that frame with this individual, if we're experiencing stress from an individual and saying their body is reacting in the only way it knows how to survive, what are the tools that I can provide this person? How can I make them feel safer? How can I understand them a little bit more? Because from that space, we can actually have a really beautiful, productive, a welcoming, unconditional interaction that is much more likely to lead to a greater outcome for that person. You know, nothing worse than taking a child under stress and then yelling at them to increase their stress, expecting that they're going to behave more normally, you know. And we all try it. Like, I'm guilty as anyone when it comes to parenting like this. You know, we think that by escalating stress, we're going to end up with a less stressed child. A less stressed child is one who's going to obey and be happier and be part of the team. So adding stress and compounding stress, particularly if we're doing it willy-nilly or out of our own stress, is often not the place. So really understand that everyone's actually trying to do their best to keep everyone else happy and themselves surviving is a really important frame in all of this.
And I think when I see couples together, this is the number one place, is that mindfulness, that to know your body. See, also with trauma, we turn off, we tune out our bodily sensations. Tiff, that sounds like you, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have that anymore. So one of the most difficult things before you can manage with someone else's stress is to be able to stop and know what's going on in your body, like Cam's saying. But to be able to be there for someone else, you have to be there for yourself first.
Yeah.
You have to be able to tune in, know what's going on, know what's good for you, have it written down. One day, the PH360 Shay app is going to tell you your heart rate just went up and now might be time to move off, have a run, breathe, whatever that might be. But I think that is where I find that people initially struggle the most, because we're so used to, that is the pattern. I feel bad, I'm going to splat it out over the world. I'm going to blame the other person for how I'm feeling in this moment. Why should I? And this is all happening because in that moment of stress, your thinking brain isn't turned on. So for everyone to take out of exactly what Cam said, to be able to love yourself and care enough about yourself, or as I thought Cam was going to say, this is my expression from the weekend, when our chief medical officer said, if you get rid of the other noise, you can hear your heart speak. I wanted to cry, because this is what we're talking about with mindfulness. When you stop and you can just engage with what's happening inside of you and you take responsibility for that and you stay with it, well, then you can come back to whoever it is that you're managing or want to increase, want to support, and then you could be there for them, which is why people go to people like me, because I'm not being triggered by you, right? You could say the same thing to me as you said to your partner, but I'm not triggered. So that's why I can be there for you. So all our job for all of us is, between understanding our neurobiology and then the narratives that we've developed on top of that, how we can be our most beautiful, balanced, extraordinary selves.
Amazing. Cam, I'm glad you put an extra 30 minutes into our time slot here.
Right. Oh, I knew it.
You could have probably squeezed in an extra 2 hours and we would have filled it.
Just go Joe Rogan on this.
Yeah, I love this conversation. If you've got any final nuggets to throw in, please do. But thank you so much.
No,
Amazing.
I think I've said that the bits I think that are most relevant right now. This is obviously a lifelong journey, is understanding yourself and others, but going forward with some principles that no one else thinks like you do. Yeah. And we often have the assumption that they are thinking exactly like we are, and we have an expectation as well that they are thinking like us. So just always have that assumption that what you think is like alien language to somebody else. That is a really good strategy to go into any confrontation or any interaction with, for sure.
Yeah, awesome. I'm going to have links to the PH360 website in the show notes of this. So if anyone's ears are pricking up over this conversation and you want to find out about your own epigenetics and your health type, or maybe, the people around you, then check out the show notes, follow the links. If you're a health professional, if you're a coach of any sort, if you're a personal trainer, there are courses that you guys can do to use this system in what you do. It's amazing. I am knee deep, or it's probably in over my head by now, in the courses and the learning around it. And it's changed my life. It's changed my life just knowing about my own health type. It's changed my life as a personal trainer. It's changed my life as a coach and a mentor for people. It's changed my life in friendships and relationships and family relationships. So I can't recommend it highly enough. It's absolutely incredible, and it's a little bit mind-blowing. So thanks again, guys.